think we should start.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning webinar on understanding lifelong learning opportunities and policies for refugees, migrants, and internally displaced people. Just to highlight that we have organized this webinar ahead of International Migrants Day, which is tomorrow, as many of you would know. And we intend to use this webinar to highlight two critical areas in the lifelong journeys of migrants, refugees, and internally displaced people, primarily covering how they access meaningful opportunities for the acquisition of literacy skills and other knowledge, skills and competencies through technology, which contributes to their survival, social integration, economic empowerment, and personal well-being, as well as their recognition of prior learning and competences within their new national context and their learning and labor systems. So without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. David Achuarina, the director of UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning, to give his opening remarks, which will then be followed by Ms. Rebecca Telford, OIC Deputy Director, Division of Resilience and Solutions for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. So please, Mr. Achuarina, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning, good evening to all. Mrs. Rebecca Telford, representing UNHCR, dear participants, colleagues, it's a pleasure for me to welcome you for this webinar. For those who are not familiar with UIL, I would like to tell you that UIL is a specialized institute of UNESCO working specifically on lifelong learning, and of course within the framework of the SDGs and SDG 4, the institute has been embarking in a number of areas of work, including a particular focus and a growing focus, I would say, on issues related to migration and its links with education and learning. So as we will be celebrating tomorrow, the International Migrants Day, I would like to stress the fact that migration has become really a structural trend in contemporary society. So as we can see in today's world, this is not a trend that has going to disappear, but countries, societies need to be ready to face this development in the world, that has of course a number of implications, including for education and learning. Just a few figures to kind of map out the magnitude of this trend. The number of international migrants increased from about 232 million in 2013 to almost 272 million in 2020. In addition, the number of refugees has also increased tremendously from 16.1 million in 2015 to 20.7 million in 2020. And finally, internally displaced persons, that's another growing phenomena, also grew from 40.5 million in 2015 to more than 48 million in 2020. So you see that we are really facing a rapid growth of this phenomena, affecting different categories of people on the move. which each require specific interventions in education and training. So if we look at the SDG 4 framework, the framework for action that was adopted in 2015, we actually may recall that it identified already migrants, refugees among the key vulnerable groups that face specific obstacles to access inclusive, equitable, quality, and lifelong opportunities. So what does that mean in terms of policies and practices? I would like to refer to a recent publication that was issued by Uil last year, which is called Embracing a Culture of Lifelong Learning, which tried to provide an updated vision on the implications for lifelong learning of the changes in our world today. And I'd like to outline 3 of the key messages of this report, which I think have strong implications for our topic today. First of all, vulnerable groups should be placed at the core of the lifelong learning agenda. So that means, including, of course, migrants, refugees, and internally displaced people. 2, recognize the holistic character of lifelong learning, which also includes the need to integrate recognition, validation, and accreditation mechanisms. So RVA mechanisms were identified as one of the important instruments actually to, in a very concrete way, make lifelong learning pathways a reality. And this should, of course, apply also to migrants and refugees. And thirdly, we must ensure greater and equitable access to technology. And this is indeed, the other, topic of our discussion today, to see how technology can be actually mobilized, tapped in to facilitate access to learning for people on the move. So I would like to outline what we mean in concrete terms regarding those 2 elements of the agenda, RVA on the one hand and technology on the other, so which are going to be discussed in details during our webinar. So first of all, I would like to recall the fact that RVA is really a very important instrument, not only for learners to access, to give them opportunities to really build, lifelong learning pathways, but also for workers, for employers, and for society as a whole. So it's not only about education, but it's also about a fair and effective functioning of the labor market. It's also about building inclusive and just societies. So it has really wide implications. And of course, when dealing with migrants and refugees, this has even, I would say, a stronger, implications in terms of social inclusion. I'd like also to stress the fact that when dealing with technology, we've had a lot of discussion in recent years about the potential of technology for learning. Some of you may be familiar with the Learning Mobile Week, which is Mobile Learning Week, which is this event organized annually by UNESCO, which looks at the potential of mobile technologies for learning. And in the past, this actually included a particular focus already on refugees and migrants. So there is already a lot of knowledge, I would say, and experiences regarding the way mobile technologies, including smartphones, can be used to give opportunities for learning to people on the move. And we're going to discuss that further this afternoon. So, well, right now, I mean, right after the opening session. So I would like just maybe to give you quickly an outline of the agenda for discussion today. We will, in the first session, have an overview of the features and the main outcome of UL work in this on this topic, with the two dimensions: RVA applied to refugee and migrants groups, and then the use and opportunities opened by technology. So we conducted a review, as you will see, of a number of experiences, and we looked at also in relation to RVA on ways in which it is implemented in different parts, in different regions of the world. We will also have an overview of the broader program and initiatives that UNESCO is conducting in relation to education for migrants and refugees. And then we will have in the second session panelists that will actually share their experience in implementing very specific programs in Lebanon, in Thailand, as well as from the research conducted in the University of Applied Sciences in Utrecht, as well as within the UNESCO Institute for Educational Planning. And I would like to thank all the panelists who have agreed to speak this morning on this session. So I believe that with this program, that will on the one hand set the kind of the analytical and the conceptual framework, at the same time, provide the state of the art today on those two dimensions, followed by contributions on specific programs. I believe that we will have a very comprehensive perspective on the issue that will also generate and facilitate an interesting exchange. Now, having said that, I would now close and give the floor to our colleague from UNHCR, with, of course, very engaged in this topic, with experiences in many parts of the world. So thank you, welcome again, and Jan, back to you.
Sure, thank you, David. Fantastic. I think you actually handed the floor over to Rebecca already, so I will just invite Rebecca to take the floor with the opening remarks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you, David, for that introduction. I just came back from the Rewired Summit in Dubai, so I've been really heartened to spend a week once again engaging with UNESCO colleagues, but also to see, even with the progress we've made toward SDG 4 and the kind of collective terror we have about how many years we have left to make some really additionally huge strides. The amount of time given at Rewired to issues for refugees and displaced populations, also to lifelong learning, some of these issues around equity, which it's taken a long time to get on the table, have been thrown into sharp relief by COVID. And so I'm very heartened to at least see, however big the challenge is, the sense of international community working together gives me real faith that we're going to get somewhere. So thank you for giving me just a few minutes to reflect on some of the, the opportunities and the challenges, particularly from the UNHCR perspective. And I wanted to build on the foundation you gave, David, in terms of some of the numbers and where we're going. I mean, we are in this time of real crisis in terms of displacement. But I also wanted us to think a little bit around what it means to look at where we're at. So one of those aspects is around understanding the protracted nature of crisis. It's very difficult for all sorts of reasons to have an idea of the average time that someone spends in displacement or someone spends as a refugee. Though if you're a statistics nerd, actually it's quite fascinating. But for now, we'll say, it's between about 15 and 20 years. So that is really huge. And I think if we put that into the perspective of an education life cycle, it means that there is a relatively strong chance that you're going to spend your primary and your secondary years, and then also have the aspirations that are coming to you be built by that foundational time whilst you are displaced. It also means when we look at lifelong learning and those opportunities, understanding really where people are coming from and how they're imagining their futures is really critical. And one of the things with UNHCR's work is we see very often that people are preparing for multiple futures at the same time, right? What happens if I have to stay in this camp? What happens if I become integrated into this host community? What happens if I'm, if I go home and I'm part of rebuilding the country I had to flee? What happens if I get resettled somewhere else? Being able to build skills, meaningful skills, accreditation, certification, and recognition that can support refugees regardless of which of those futures they end up with, I think is a job which is our collective responsibility. But it's also something which gives us a really clear framework within which to engage. The other thing I wanted to just mention in terms of displacement is I do think it's really helpful for us to think about displacement collectively and those different constituencies that you mentioned, David, in your introduction. But I also would just note, refugees have a specific legal status, and it does then set them aside in terms of access, in terms of needs, and in terms of solutions to some other groups. And that's also the group for whom UNHCR has the mandate. I think there is an increasing interest in looking at solutions that work across, IDPs, refugees, and migrants. But certainly from UNHCR's perspective, or when we think about things like certification and recognition of prior qualifications, the situations for refugees are likely to be different, because then you're looking at cross-border issues, you're looking potentially at language, and even areas like understanding, the foundational skills which are built into one curricula and then not into another. So I think it's very helpful for us to be thinking broadly, but also being extremely clear where different populations have specific needs. Now, I just wanted to touch on a couple of other issues, and I think one of the places where we've worked incredibly closely with UNESCO recently has been around, connected education, looking at digital skills and looking at technologies. UNHCR has worked in connected education for more than 10 years. I think there are particular initiatives and policies that we've worked on, but we also have done a lot of analysis around access and what that access means in terms of quality and in terms of moving on. And that includes during this time of COVID, where I think we collectively saw, a huge flourishing of innovations, but also some real challenges in terms of whether those are built and designed to be equitable, to be useful and meaningful to people, and whether groups like refugees are being included. So this week, UNHCR has launched a report, Connected Education for Refugees, Addressing the Digital Divide. And that presented some analysis of specifically how refugees and displaced learners globally were able to engage in learning from home, the places where there were good practices, but actually the growing digital divide, which I think is probably not a surprise to anybody on this call, but in terms of what do we do next, it's really important to recognize it. I mean, it's true for all of us, COVID disrupted education for everybody, but we estimate that refugee learners lost an average of 142 days of school, and that probably 78% of all school-age refugee learners had limited to no access to learning opportunities during this time. I think what we also found that was interesting, not just from the technology side, but in terms of when we're considering, lifelong learning and engagement, is looking at the role of families, the role of communities, the role of having a learning population who are then able to support each other during these times of crisis. So that report has come out, and I think the core message from that is this really urgent need to ensure that refugees are included in current and ongoing investments into connectivity and connected education. I think collectively we see what's been happening during COVID and before is incredibly exciting, but it also risks leaving certain groups further behind, particularly those who are far away, potentially displaced on borders, potentially unable to access infrastructure. There are places where you're unable to get a SIM card, for example, as a refugee. It's not part of your kind of legal ability. There's also places where people are just far. I mean, the refugee camps in Kenya, which has generally extremely high level infrastructure, some of the populations are just too far from a radio signal to be able to realize it. So whilst we're looking at the investments and finding them positive, this need to dramatically scale them in a way which includes refugees and other populations in a meaningful way is really, really critical. And I think, again, to come back to this point on certification and accreditation, which you mentioned and is so core to what is being offered, connected education and digital skills really must continue to be docked in those areas. I think there's a lot of approaches where we look at the skills and the competencies around digital and around technology, and they can be very important, but we should never lose sight of the need for certification, the need for accreditation, for recognition, and for pathways which meaningfully speak to those different futures that I mentioned at the start. So UNHCR also this week launched the Refugee Connected Education Challenge, and the aim of that, including continuing to work with UNESCO, is to recognize these very specific areas where refugees are being left behind in terms of connectivity and that digital divide. And it looks at working across all the different pieces happening globally and at national level in host countries to kind of work together. So we could also share some information about that, but we'd really encourage people to join with us. It's a kind of challenge where people can bring whatever it is that they offer, whether they're stakeholders like governments or donors, mobile network operators, down to kind of the smallest community-based organization. So I will start to finish there. I mean, I think we have mentioned throughout, this recognition of prior learning and competencies, and the need to focus that alongside the national system, alongside the pathways, the accreditation, and the kind of moving into new futures is so critical. And I think we've partnered with UNESCO in a number of ways, including on UQP, and thinking about what is it that we've taken from those different initiatives. What has that experience been like for refugees and displaced persons themselves? And how does it also help with our policy and resource mobilization, working with governments, working with host communities, and making sure that everyone has access to the kind of high quality information and education that they need to access the futures that they desire. So I will stop there, but thank you so much for inviting me to say those few words. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was very inspiring and informative opening remarks to complement what David mentioned in his outline. So without further ado, let me now invite the moderator for session 1, which will cover the UNESCO and UIL's research, as well as the broader activities of UNESCO. To moderate for this session, Ms. Rehat Soda-Shailyeva, team leader in the Policy Support and Capacity Development unit of UIL. So Rehat, please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jean, and thank you so much for all the speakers of today's webinar, as well as participants who made their time available for this interesting and very important issue of lifelong learning for refugees, migrants, and IDPs. I would like to highlight that the session 1 will be about the work that UIL is doing, but also UNESCO doing in the area of lifelong learning of these target populations. The most important thing are the two, the research that we have been doing for some time. One is and the technology's role for expanding access and quality of basic skills, which will be shared by my colleague Jian Shiteng. And the second one will be on the RVA, particularly looking at the global findings or global lessons learned from this issue of RVA, and it will be presented by Ms. Marian Mclaughlin, and who is also going to highlight, I believe, some of the cases that which we have collected. In the presentation, the session will be concluded by Mari Yasunaga, our colleague from UNESCO, to give further information on the UNESCO's work in general. Each presenter of this session will have 10 minutes to make their presentations. Please adhere to their time limit strictly. And if you have any questions, please write on the Q&A section so our colleagues can respond directly, but if you would like to raise some questions you would like to be answered on the floor, then please let us know. We will be reserving them for the end of the webinar today after session 2. So I would like to invite first speaker. Sorry, I have Miss misordered Marian Mclaughlin to present on the RVA research findings from UIL.
Thank you, Hakat. Can everybody see my screen properly?
If you can present the slide, that would be nice.
So you can't see the slide right now?
We can see that, but it's not in the full screen.
Okay.
Yeah, now your notes are seen.
Okay, that's very strange. Just give me 1 second.
While Mari is fixing the technological issue here, or technical issue, I would like to introduce Ms. Marian Mclaughlin, is a program specialist at UIL, and she's working closely on the issue of RVA at UIL. So she'll be presenting today the work which we are doing at the Institute.
I think I will just use this screen for now, if that's okay, just because otherwise the presenter view seems to be a little bit wonky. You're not able to see my whole screen. Is this okay? Can you see?
It's fine, it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you, Hakat, for introducing me. My name is Marian Mclaughlin, and I work at the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning. I'll be talking specifically today about our work in the field of RVA, which stands for Recognition, Validation, and Accreditation of Non-Formal and Formal Learning for Migrants and Refugees. And this is part of a wider project at UIL that we're conducting specifically for this target group. So before I get into the specifics of RVA for migrants and refugees, I wanted to provide a little bit of clarity with regard to the context and the concept for this work. So RVA, like I just mentioned, refers to the recognition, validation, and accreditation of all forms of learning outcomes. And essentially it enables for all the different types of learnings that we go about in our lives to be validated in a specific system at a particular level in a country. It's overall an enabler for lifelong learning, as they make this type of knowledge visible. They value this large amount of knowledge that tends to become or be invisible as we can obtain these forms of knowledge through very different settings as opposed to necessarily through formal education. RVA is often referred to as RPL or VPL, or in some countries specific terms such as VAE in France, for example. So the recognition brings this visibility to unrecognized learning. Overall, it also has the ability to boost self-esteem for well-being, also enable access to greater job opportunities. And generally, it can help integrate broader sections of the population into learning processes, labor markets, and generally makes better use of existing human resources in particular contexts where such systems exist. This is why RVA is technically seen as central for achieving SDG 4. It facilitates access to educational opportunities, flexible learning pathways. It credits learners with previously acquired knowledge and skills, including, for example, technical and vocational skills, literacy and numeracy, and also it promotes overall sustainable development, the types of skill needed for sustainable development. So as such, we recognize it as an important tool and something that the mechanisms around providing RVA is something that we see very important at UIL through our work for refugees and migrants. So moving on specifically to today's discussion. So in recent years, we know, and Rebecca painted the picture for us as well, more people have been moving across borders, whether voluntary or forcibly, in search of different opportunities. We have specifically about 270 plus million international migrants, over 25 million refugees, and over 41 million internally displaced people, according to the International Organization for Migration. So with these high levels of migration, there's also pressure on education systems to provide opportunities for these population, and the education system itself has pressure in terms of capacity to deal with this strain. And due to the conflict situation, migrants and refugees may have also dropped out of school for several years, maybe not attended school at all, or be lacking some of their qualifications document. And as part of this, or rather against this backdrop specifically, the support and integration of refugees and migrants and IDPs remained overall a global priority. One of the main challenges we've identified at UIL and UNESCO is also the fact that refugees and migrants face some issues with regard to having their prior learning recognized. So once they arrive in a country, not necessarily able to pick up, and would, often in many cases have to start again and not have the right access to the specific learning pathways to foster their career development, access labor market or educational opportunities. So that's the type of backdrop we're working with. The role of RVA for migrants and refugees. So like I mentioned just a little bit earlier, RVA builds on someone's already acquired competencies and skills. It gives people, and then specifically here migrants and refugees, an incentive to continue to learn, and also empowers them to be more active in the labor market, in the society in which they are being hosted in or choosing to live in. And overall, this type of process specifically fosters this notion of lifelong learning. More specifically, RVA can maximize the benefits of mobility by ensuring that migrants and refugees find employment abroad that corresponds to their skills and continue their learning at the right level. But it can also create a more level playing field, so in education and training for migrants and refugees. So I think I listed here 2 specific examples. I hope you can still see okay. For example, in Germany, 4 years after their arrival in the country, migrants with fully recognized qualifications are more likely to be employed and earned hourly wages around 40% higher than immigrants without recognized qualifications. So that's one specific example for RVA in Germany. And then in Italy, there was a survey where 30,000 migrants with foreign academic degrees show that qualification recognition substantially reduced unemployment. So overall, these types of benefits in mind, I think we can, I see I only have 5 more minutes for my presentation, so I'll go quickly. I'll focus quickly on the challenges that we've identified as part of our work at UIL, specifically looking into what RVA systems exist in specific countries. So we understand that RVA mechanisms are quite complex. Specifically, the establishment of robust RVA systems require not only policies and frameworks at national, regional, and sectoral levels, but also the importance of involving different types of stakeholders, such as employers, NGOs, institutions, training. So this overall creates an additional difficulty in the sense that developing a system with such a high number of actors can be quite tricky. Even though most countries typically offer validation opportunities to all citizens, often the projects are the systems in place are very project-based. So most RVA arrangements directed toward refugees and migrants are short-term initiatives with very limited time frame to operate with. And finally, another key challenge we've identified specifically in the literature is that most of the available literature on RVA mechanisms at the moment focuses on the European context. This is something that is evolving, that we're also finding in our survey of countries around the world. So I'm going to skip this particular slide just because it's more related to our project. And I'd like to focus on some of the findings that we've identified with regard to challenges and barriers. So one of the main challenges that we are currently that we have identified is the fact that there's a lack of an integrated approach. So systems typically will not be the systems are not necessarily connected. The bodies across the different institutions are not always connected. So there's as such a lack of efficient institutional coordination. between multiple governments, departments, subnational authorities, leading to often a lack of transparency and a lack of efficiency. So another key challenge overall is also lack of sustainable initiatives. This is something I mentioned just a little bit earlier. Very project-based initiatives, meaning that they target specific groups of the population for a specific amount of time. They don't really reverberate into the broader national systems. So it's hard to measure their impact on the long term, and it's also difficult to keep active. And then finally, lack of access to the end user. This really revolves around the idea that the end user isn't aware of the opportunity available at hand for them to have their prior learning recognized. They don't necessarily are able to communicate in their language. They don't have access to the right type of staff with the right expertise necessarily to guide them to assess their portfolios, to review their profile. They also have lost qualifications, so they have difficulty in explaining what they're working with, and not finding the right staff to greet them on that. So here I'm just going to share briefly some interesting examples and best practices that we have identified through some of our first findings in this research. So I don't think maybe I'll have time to go through all of them, but I'll list a few here. So the Start Wien project in Vienna, Start Vienna Youth College, provides recently arrived youth, migrants and refugees, as well as asylum seekers, the opportunity to integrate into the Austrian education and training systems. It's offered at the Adult Education Center in Vienna, and it starts with an assessing phase where existing skills and competencies are recognized and the level of education is determined by expert assessors. And using this particular information, the center develops an individual education plan for the learner to then find out what type of access to what best a flexible pathway will work for that particular person. In Jordan, the Technical Vocational Skills Development Commission, in partnership with the International Labour Organization, actually developed in 2018 a program to implement RVA for refugees in the construction and the manufacturing sectors, including using assessment and portfolio methods. And this particular initiative allows workers to obtain free work permits, which are required to work, and provide employees with additional benefits to enter the labor markets. And in terms of numbers, around 15 or 16,000 Syrians and Jordanians actually benefited from the program. I think I'll briefly touch upon Brazil. So Brazil, the REDE certificate came to fruition in 2009, which is a network that targets workers who seek formal recognition of knowledge, expertise, and professional competencies developed in formal and non-formal learning experiences through professional certification process. So it really responds to the need for the recognition of basic and continuing qualification for professional certification, scaling up the training of workers. In Sweden, the Fast Track program provides skill upgrade based on appraisals of the qualifications that have been gained abroad by the refugees, migrants, and IDPs, as well as the learning outcomes from non-formal and informal contexts, also language proficiencies, personal competencies, and general knowledge, which are matched with specific occupations in the country, as well as job vacancies. So based on this, the necessary upgrade of skills and competencies is initiated, and opportunities for further learning, flexible learning are created for migrants and refugees. And they also target this initiative for 14 different sectors in which there are labor shortages.
Ari, maybe you can share the last slide. Sorry,
I think I will.
Yeah,
I will skip those last two examples, just to say that at Uil, the research we've been focusing on has been in 3 separate regions. So looking at the developments of systems in place for recognizing, validating, accrediting non-formal, informal outcomes of learning for refugees and migrants in Colombia, Mexico, Brazil, Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan, and Thailand, which we'll hear from today, Malaysia and Indonesia. This research will be published next year, along with early next year our literature review surveying what already exists today on the topic of RVA for refugees and migrants. This will feed into capacity building tools that we will be sharing with all of the countries we just mentioned, but also more generally with countries who are faced with large influx of refugees and migrants, to help them self-assess and support their ongoing or new developments for creating RVA systems. And we'll be looking at providing an online course open for all these countries as our efforts for capacity building. And I look forward to discussing this more in depth, maybe later on today. And thank you, Haikat, for giving me the time.
Thank you so much. As you have heard from Mari, that these are the preliminary findings of the work our colleagues are doing at UIL, and the publication will be available next year. And more further information or questions can be directed to my colleague Marian Mclaughlin. Thank you, Mari. Without overdue, I would like to invite the next speaker, Mr. Zhen Shiteng, Program Specialist at UIL, who will be speaking to the leveraging technology for literacy and education for refugees, migrants, and internally displaced people. Zhen, over to you. If you could already upload your slide, well, that will be good. Thank you. You have also 10 minutes, but if you could stick to the time, it would be very nice. Zhen?
Yes. Just checking that you can see this entire slide. There's none of my notes there. Okay.
No.
It's tricky. Always technical issues when we do webinars. So thank you very much, Mari, for the introduction and a very informative presentation on RVA. As Rahat mentioned, I'm going to be talking about what we found in our research into how technology has been leveraged for literacy and education for refugees, migrants, and internally displaced people. What you see on the slide itself actually is the title of our publication, which we expect to launch in February next year. So you can look forward to that. And this is sort of a teaser or a preview of some really interesting insights that we've found. So this is a visual representation provided by a source from UNHCR that shows some of the key numbers that actually David already mentioned in his presentation, in his opening remarks. I just want to emphasize that the numbers here are very important because they speak to different target groups, especially this number, 272 million migrants that IOM has data provides to us at the end of 2019, of which 2/3 are labor migrants. Which is not clearly defined, but we are working under the understanding that those are from less developed countries with limited education and also limited proficiency in literacy and numeracy. So the numbers are staggering, and they have increased over the past decade, and it just speaks to the importance of this issue. Another interesting thought to have in your mind is actually looking at the major source countries and the major hosting countries for refugees. Just to sort of showcase that the source and host countries are usually neighboring countries or countries in the developing context, so developing countries. So I think it's important because many of you are experts in this area, but the media, I feel, is quite apparently showing a sort of a skewed perspective of where the immediate issues are. So one of the most important statistics to know is that actually, Europe receives about 11% of the world's refugees, while 86% or more are being hosted by developing countries, and 73% are hosted in neighboring countries. Similarly, the top 5 countries for IDPs are, for example, Congo, Afghanistan, Syria, and other countries with conflict situations. I would just like to quickly then talk about how literacy is also a very persistent and issue in the world. We have an estimated 773 million youth and adults who lack basic literacy skills. Based on UIL's research in 2019, more than 1/3 of countries did not know the participation rates of adult learning for a variety of marginalized groups, including refugees and migrants. And 26% of countries reported that they didn't prioritize government funding for these vulnerable groups. So given that situation, I think it's all the more important, to highlight that SDG 4.6 on literacy is a target that is, as Rebecca mentioned, it's a ambitious target to reach by 2030, but its importance cannot be denied. And the UNESCO strategy on youth and adult literacy sort of emphasizes that, and is a real motivation for this particular research to address the learning needs of disadvantaged groups, as well as understanding how the digital technologies can be leveraged to expand access and improve learning outcomes. And just another point, to move beyond literacy as well, is the connection between literacy, low cognitive skills as defined by literacy and numeracy proficiency, is, those who are limited in literacy and numeracy have also limited participation in job-related adult learning. So it goes beyond the talk of literacy, but also connects to employment, better lives, and better opportunities. So given that rationale and that context, we developed 3 research questions that we wanted answered, or to explore more. So what are the main literacy issues for youth and adult refugees, migrants, and internally displaced people? How do different approaches that use ICTs impact on literacy teaching and learning? And what strategies have programs themselves actually used to overcome common challenges in implementation? So the methodology, I think, is something you would all be familiar with. It is covers, after a comprehensive literature review, we also covered 25 case studies, which operated in over 73 countries, all covering nearly 6 million learners. I think what is really problematic here that we found was that actually no program emphasized or worked directly with internally displaced people, and nor sort of in combination with migrants or others, as you can see in the Venn diagram. So I mean, refugees were clearly the most targeted and valued, or most beneficiary group with the most focus amongst the case studies that we looked at that used technology. So regarding research question 1, which was what is the literacy situation? What are the main literacy issues for youth and adults? What we found was that there was extremely limited data, just in terms of quantitative data, statistics, particularly in low and middle income developing countries. So national education data submitted to UNESCO are not broken down by migrant and displacement status, for example. And these are countries where migrants and displaced youth and adults are most are present in the most, right? So not in developed countries. The second is that we noted there was an absence of literacy, I guess, in the global frameworks and international documents, including the Global Compact and the Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement, or the African Union Convention for the Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced People. The third insight was more at the national perspective, national level, where we found that the policies were very fragmented and did not have a clear emphasis or focus on literacy for youth and adults, refugees, migrants, and IDPs. They often lacked the strategies for adult education for vulnerable groups, or had fragmented programs and activities that were sort of very difficult, for the potential learners to explore or to access. This was, for example, found in Australia as part of the English language provision. It's also important to share that we found numerous challenges to learning. I think I may have to skip this, but the effects of trauma and other stresses affected learning of these target groups. They also commonly manifested in intersecting inequalities. So girls and women, or those with disabilities, were even more vulnerable within these groups. And so it was also pertinent to note that there were very, very much diverse linguistic backgrounds. So this has an impact on how they acquire new languages, whether or not they were literate in their mother tongue in the first place, or the similarities of the origins of their mother tongue or native language and the language of their host countries, or the language that they plan to learn. So when learning takes 3 to 5 years or 7 to 10 years, even for those who are non-literate, it's a very significant obstacle. And then this connects with the protraction and displacement that protracted nature of displacement that Rebecca mentioned earlier.
You
Lastly,
have 1 minute, so you have to go faster, please.
Okay, sure. Lastly, I think what was highlighted as well was the cost of programs, not only the financial cost, but I think the opportunity cost of attending these programs was something that was too large an obstacle for learners who are interested in this. So in terms of what ICT can offer, we know that there's much that's been said about its flexibility and personalization, and how mobile technologies have become more prominent and also widely used among migrants, refugees, and internally displaced people. But they also have to navigate using these digital tools in new environments, which is like multiple levels of stresses that affect learning. As well as the digital divide, that's also a well-known phenomenon, and it affects the equitable access across many different factors. So ICT support should not be seen in isolation. There are types of access to ICT and exposure that need to be context-specific and learner-centered. Having technology available does not also imply that it will be used effectively or comprehensively. And lastly, that the use of technology for learning should build on principles of adult learning. So from the case studies that we had, we came up, 6 key themes emerged: access and inclusion, capacity building for teachers and educators, relevant content and andragogy, monitoring and evaluation as part of program implementation, using strategic partnerships to mitigate gaps or limitations, as well as recognition, validation, accreditation issues. So I think in terms of access inclusion, it is the crucial first step. that in many of these programs. And what we saw was that innovations have included use of mass media, radio and text messaging, alone or in combination with advanced technologies. And as mentioned, the transition to mobile-first formats and platforms was very prevalent. So one of the most interesting programs that we looked at was one that Rising on Air that combined interactive radio instruction and SMS to enhance parental engagement with radio-based lessons. And it covered Sierra Leone, Liberia, and Ghana, targeting refugees, migrants, and out-of-school youth. And the reason for that, as you can all guess, is that that's because radio was the most accessible technology in those countries.
Maybe we have to go faster to the last slide because we're already over the time.
Sure. Yeah. These slides will be available after the presentation, but I think perhaps then I would like to highlight that I think the insights that we derived from our analysis of the cases showed, and the literature review, showed the importance of bridging this gap in understanding the actual state of literacy and literacy provision for these vulnerable groups. It was essentially non-existent, so we need to understand the situation to be able to tackle it in the future. Secondly, that technological innovation often has a lot of potential, and what we're seeing is a combination and mixing and matching of different technologies to better meet learners' needs as well as educators if they're also involved in program implementation. Of course, learners need to be at the center given their diverse characteristics and backgrounds, as well as the cultural differences as well. And lastly, I think what we noticed was that all the programs had some element of cross-border and cross-cultural partnerships, which was something that I think surprised us actually, and shows actually how technology can be harnessed, to bridge geographical, cultural divides and other obstacles that perhaps would not exist without it. So, or would be facilitated more easily with technology. So apologies for not being able to cover comprehensively the 5 other themes that we found from the case studies, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Jean, and I'm really sorry for rushing all the speakers of the session 1. We are behind the time of the agenda, and I would like to respect also other speakers in session 2. As Jean has highlighted, the synthesis report will be published by the end of February next year, and we'll be also launching it again as a webinar, and he will be Jean will be able to present in more detail during that time. I would like to invite the 3rd speaker, Ms. Marian Yasunaga, Program Specialist from the Section for Youth Literacy and Skills Development from UNESCO headquarters. Maria, you also have 10 minutes. Please strictly follow the time. Over to you, Maria, if you can switch on your mic and video and share your presentation.
Thank you, Rakat. And hello, everybody. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of Mr. Uil Research, who leads my section dedicated to youth literacy and skills development at UNESCO headquarters. I'm going to talk about UNESCO's work for the promotion of lifelong learning opportunities for people on the move, with a particular focus on literacy, skills development, and recognition of skills and qualifications. I should say that the UIL work on the RVA and technology-enabled learning literacy learning presented by previous speakers, the Marie and Jian, are its integral part and important part. My presentation also includes some information provided by the section of migration, displacement, emergencies and education at UNESCO headquarters, which leads and coordinates the UNESCO's work in this area at headquarters, in the field offices and institutes. UNESCO's work in this area are part of its broad mission, so to contribute to peace building, poverty eradication and sustainable development. It is anchored in the SDGs, the Education 2030 Agenda and the Global Compacts. And our approach to education and lifelong learning is grounded on a vision of development that is economically inclusive, socially just, and environmentally sustainable. With this vision, we promote education and lifelong learning through a rights-based and humanistic approach, perceiving education as a public and common good. Here, you can see figures that describe the state of people on the move and their education. I will not go into the details because these are already covered by previous speakers, but we know that the number of the people on the move is increasing and facing multiple challenges. And then of special attention required in the context of COVID-19, which has magnified the inequalities. And many of refugees, migrants, and IDPs are deprived of learning opportunities. Lastly, maybe urgency of the issue was highlighted by the Ms. Telford of the UNHCR, especially in the context of COVID-19 crisis. So attention and action is required to the fact that education receives only 2 to 4% of humanitarian aid. So now, UNESCO's work on the education for people on the move. So our overall goal is to support member states to ensure that education system provide inclusive, equitable, equality education for all and at all levels.
Sorry, Maria, maybe Jamil has to share the slide as full screen because we see your notes as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jamil, could you, yeah, thank you. Yeah. That's right. So there are two strategic, could you go back to the previous screen? So there are two strategic objectives. So one is strengthen legal frameworks, policy and planning. And the second one, foster safe, inclusive, supportive environments for teaching and learning. And these will be done through system strengthening, knowledge generation, dissemination, and advocacy through leadership, thought leadership. So, for instance, for system strengthening, that we support member states to enhance the legislation policy framework and sector planning. One example, for instance, is we have the UNESCO 1960 Convention Against Discrimination in Education, and we do the consultation, and then we just completed the 10th consultation on its implementation. So these country reports also shows that how country supported this the people on the move in the field of education. Another example is the technical support provided for Ecuador's national education response strategies to meet the needs of populations on the move. We also enhance data and evidence, ensuring the better collection, coverage, analysis, and use, and for planning and management. In the field of knowledge generation, we just had the presentation, two presentations, but also I can refer to the report that of the Global Education Monitoring Report 2019 version that focus on this topic: migration, displacement, and education, building bridges, not walls. And advocacy is an important part, so which I will talk about it later. So UNESCO's work in literacy. So our work is informed by the 2030 vision of literacy, in which literacy is perceived as a continuum of proficiency that is developed throughout one's life. And then today's literacy sort of literacy skills includes the digital skills. This is the concept of literacy that UNESCO is promoting. As Gian mentioned, our current work is guided by UNESCO strategy. Could you move the slide? So our work is guided by the UNESCO strategy for youth and adult literacy. So it has 4 strategic priority areas plus the one related to the advancing the global agenda. So somehow we promote the learning of the people on the move through these different strategic priority areas, and informed by the 2030 vision of this literacy. And a major platform is the global platform for implementation is the Global Alliance for Literacy within the framework of lifelong learning, which is managed by the UIL. So we are targeting the 29 countries which face the great literacy challenges. And then the next slide, please. Just to show that some examples of what we do in the field of literacy. So David mentioned the Mobile Learning Week, but also we have the celebrations of Literacy Day, which we use as an occasion to promote the literacy learning for these populations, as well as the UNESCO International Literacy Prizes. The GIAN presented the PRECEDA supported project, so the research coming from that project. We have also the activities at regional and country level. Some examples are highlighted here. So emergency project to strengthen education and literacy in Chad, support for adult literacy in Afghanistan, and assessment of literacy skills among Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And then in the field of Tibet, we have now our work is guided by the Tibet strategy, and now we are ending the current cycle of the strategy. So we are building the next sort of the ideas for the next phase. So the currently we have a preliminary sort of the framework for this next Tibet strategy. Which has 3 pillars. So the developing the skills for individuals to learn, to work, and to live. And at the second pillar is the developing skills for inclusive and sustainable economies. And the third one is for inclusive and peaceful society. And we have in this strategy, the cross-cutting areas that covers the policy, normative work, also data evidence, and the partnership dimensions. Next slide, please. So in the field of Tibet, we have also some flagship programs. So for instance, that we have the provision of Tibet, so on the job training and entrepreneurship education to youth affected by the Syrian crisis in Jordan. And also we have another program in South Sudan for the youth action for reduced violence and enhanced school cohesion in WAU. Other examples are also from the Afghanistan, establishing National Center for Excellence, also the Mosul, the job creation for youth through the Center of Good Vocational Excellence in Construction Skills.
Mari, you have 1 minute. I'm really sorry to rush you through again.
Okay, so these are the next slides, please. Yeah, so promoting the recognition of skills and qualifications are indeed very important part. So at the global level, we, for instance, develop the tools. We also provide the resources and publications, and then also the conventions and foresight research. At the regional level, also we support member states and strengthening their qualification systems, the regional and country levels. So just to next slide, please. So just to give you one example. So what reference level tool? So we are developing this tool because the qualification from different countries can vary considerably, as the previous speakers mentioned. So there's no global skills recognition framework. So this is really an issue for the people on the move. So the word reference levels tool is to have make available an internationally recognized form of description, which can be used in comparing qualifications or negotiating the recognition of progression arrangements. So it's composed of 3 elements. And so 11 elements of competencies, 8 stages of progression, and indicators for progression. It's also digitally available. And currently we're exploring with the newly established WHO Academy, the possibility of piloting the World Reference Level 2 for their training courses. The next slide, please. This is the last one. So we have also the UNESCO qualification passport to facilitate the move, sort of the recognition of the qualification in the field of higher education. So this is really the quick sketch of what UNESCO does, especially in the field of literacy in Tibet, to complement the previous presentations. If you are interested in our work and wants to know more, please do visit our website or simply contact us. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Mari, for actually following the time. If you have further questions, please contact Mari, but also you can already post your questions on the Q&A. I would like to thank all the 3 presenters of the session 1. As Jean has highlighted, that this was the teaser before we actually launch the officially 2 publications, one on RVA, another is on technology's role for literacy. Thank you so much, Marie, for presenting overview from the global perspective, and specifically on literacy, but also TVET and higher education to some extent. I would like to invite now the next session speakers, as well as the moderator. Moderator of the session, Mr. Raul Valdez-Cotera. He is the team leader of policy support and capacity building at UIL. Raul, it's over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't know if you can hear me well, Rakat.
Yes, very well.
Super. Well, thank you very much. This was quite interesting session. Time is always against us, but I think we have a very good background of the research that is taking place at UIL, but also at UNESCO. So very pleased to continue this session 2. And on this one, I'd like to move more from the research part to the practical experiences. Let me try to see if I can use a microphone. I have some problems with my.
It's very good now.
This is better?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So we'll move then to these experiences that could be a good complement to what we heard before. And we have a list of 4 speakers from different regions that could help us to understand a little more how things are happening in the field. And I would like to invite them to take the floor and to present for 3, maximum 5 minutes what they have been doing in their own region with the specific programs. So with further delay, I would like to invite, we have Ms. Diana Atala. She's education consultant at the Education Development Trust. On Insight, she will present from working with Syrian refugees in Lebanon. So Diana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just let me share my screen.
Maximum 5 minutes, please.
Yes,
it's like
sure.
an elevator pitch.
Sure. Can you see my screen?
Very well.
All right. So marhaba. It feels good to be part of this webinar today. I'm Diana Atala, and I work with Education Development Trust on the AST program in Lebanon as an educational consultant since 4 years now. I would like to share with you the amazing work we are doing with the Syrian refugee educators. The program aims to building teacher capacity in English language teaching to use the English language as a medium of instruction in classrooms. The program originated to solve a problem the refugee teachers were facing when the Lebanese Ministry of Education decided to teach math and science in English in public schools, starting KG classes. Hence, a language transition gap was created between the NGO students moving from the NGOs to Lebanese public schools because the NGO teachers didn't use English in class, the curriculum didn't allow students opportunities to practice the language, teachers used basic teaching strategies that did not focus on students using the language themselves. And finally, the minimal exposure and support refugee students get from their parents at home to acquire the language. So Education Development Trust partnered with 3 main NGOs, Sawa, Jusur, and MAPS, and we developed an English language course for the teachers where we teach English as a language, and we model and introduce good teaching strategies to implement in classroom. The English language courses are supported by teacher learning communities, evidence-based supervision, which is coaching supervisors to observe and give feedback to teachers. In brief, we delivered English courses to different levels following the CFR framework with a total of 30 hours of face-to-face or online lessons in addition to 30 hours of WhatsApp assignments on a weekly basis. In 2017, we started with a direct reach of 50 educators, and in 2021, we reached around 120 educators on a yearly basis, with an indirect reach that increased from 1,000 to 4,500 students in a year. I will not talk much about the curriculum, the assessment, and the M&E stats and numbers. I will only share with you a few pictures to give you a feel of how we are truly making a difference. So our program is not only helping refugee teachers use English as a medium of instruction in classrooms, it is also a safe platform to build bridges, learn best teaching strategies, and surely a venting space to talk about their worries, challenges, and dreams as refugees in Lebanon. As you can see in this picture, we deliver interactive and engaging lessons through Zoom. And this is one example of a show and tell lesson. In the second picture, our activities are hands-on and student-centered, where the teacher has ownership of his or her learning. Every course has an end-of-course project that can be something like a puppet show in English or a video to talk about superhero teachers during the pandemic. Our courses since 2017 effectively integrated WhatsApp for communication and assignments. And now, with the online delivery, we use many other online tools and platforms. In our needs analysis, when we started designing this course, we found that there is a major need to focus on speaking and listening. We realized that many of the teachers studied English in Syria, but they rarely used it. Hence, we decided to work a lot on celebrating mistakes and breaking the wall of shyness and to help them speak and use the language. Finally, Education Development Trust is pioneering international organization in the field of research. And in our courses, we model and explain evidence-based face-to-face and online best teaching practices like 21st century skills. Now, to wrap it up, we are very proud of the teachers we are working with, and we are very grateful for the partnerships we have developed with the NGOs that genuinely led to changing lives and making a difference. This is a short video to give you a real feel of the beautiful people we are working with, that nothing can stop them from enjoying their learning time, even an electricity cut off. Shukran. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, very much. This is amazing work. Really nice to hear from that. I'm sure some questions will come, but what I will do is I will give the floor to the next presenter, and then we'll come with some questions. So I will move then forward and give the floor to Ms. Punramol Sudhirit. She's Foreign Relations Officer at the Office of Non-Formal and Informal Education at the Ministry of Education in Thailand. And she will present the case on migrant refugees in the Thailand experience. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Raul. Good evening from Bangkok, Thailand. My name is Punramol Sudhirit, a Foreign Relations Officer of the Office of Non-Formal and Informal Education, Ministry of Education from Thailand. So I would like to give you a very brief introduction about the ONI, we call in short as ONI, and what we are doing right now. So Ministry of Education of Thailand through the Office of Non-Formal and Informal Education, or called in short as ONI, as the key organization provides education to non-Thai or stateless children, youth, and adults To be more precise about the meaning of the stateless, so Thailand has identified regulations for stateless people as these following groups. First one is the immigrants to Thailand. The second one, illegal children and persons studying in schools. The third one, rootless people. Next, people appreciated by the nation. Fifth, legal Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodian workforce unable to go back to their home country. And the last one, the other alien people without qualifications, according to 5 groups mentioned above. So what we are doing right now is we offer the curricula used for them developed by ONI, which consists of Thai literacy promotion program and basic non-formal education curriculum, BE 2551 or 2008. For those who want to learn, the latter one have to pass the formal one. So this is very brief because I have to like save some time for the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramon. This is very succinct and very concise, very precise. Thank you for the information. I'm sure some questions will come later on. We will move then to the next presenter. I would like to ask our next partner presenter, which is Ruud Dubekot. He's associate professor from the University of Applied Science in Utrecht, and he will present on the RVA experience internationally for migrants and refugees. Ruud.
Thank you.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I'll share my screen. So, I'm Ruud Dubekot from the Netherlands. I'd like to give you a short tour of the Uil Research Program we're at the moment conducting with Marian Mclaughlin from Uil and Raul involved. We are investigating the presence of and utilization of recognition, validation, and accreditation practices in Latin America, Brazil, Mexico, and Colombia, more specifically, the Arab region, Egypt, Jordan, and Iraq, and Southeast Asia, Thailand, already mentioned before, Malaysia, and Indonesia. The research program focuses on migrants and refugees. The key findings so far are that actually the necessary instruments and examples for successfully embedding RVA systematics into learning and working systems are already there. They just are waiting to be used, but not activated so much. Secondly, if RVA works for integrating refugees and migrants into existing national learning and working systems, that means that it will also work for all people in the country, so also for national citizens. So why not set up RVA? So some of the critical success factors we already found for including refugees and migrants in the new country is that what actually is needed is that we, as a country, it needs to move from policy to practice. The policy is there, but the practice is lagging far behind. That goes for any country in the world, by the way. What is critical is, first of all, that outreach is offered. So practice what the law preaches. You know, every country has for instance, in its national law, stated that education should be accessible to all. So also for newcomers in a country. Outreach factor 2, information provision should be provided on any learning and job promotion. This kind of outreach is also lagging far behind with what's available and possible, especially through web-based information provision. Thirdly, a critical success factor is offer services for portfolio buildup so that people can fill in their own portfolio or dossier with their prior learning experiences from non-formal, informal, and formal backgrounds. This goes as well as for refugees and migrants as for national citizens. It's so important because this brings ownership to learning also to the individuals in a country. What's also important is that qualification systems should be matched or linked to systems for occupational standards, so on the labor market. So learning and working systems should be able to be matched. National qualification frameworks offer that opportunity, of course. Then it's vital to have in the learning culture of a country the acceptance that learning should be equal treated, whatever the learning environment. So does learning come from an informal, non-formal, or formal learning experience? It doesn't matter where something is learned. What matters is that it needs to be valued. Another factor is that assessment is very effective once it's both summative assessing and formative advising further learning. So summative in a retrospective way and formative in a prospective way. And then, of course, very, very crucial is that a country and the country's learning and so education and training system should be able to offer tailored learning. And this, of course, needs a lot of capacitation of staff in learning and working and training settings, capacitation of people who are going to provide information provision, etc., etc. So these are some of the preliminary findings and conclusions of the reports that are going to be published in February. Thank you very much.
Good, thanks a lot for this the summary of what the work on RVA is taking place right now. And I would like to move to the last speaker, and would like to invite Stephanie Bankston, working in the International Institute for Educational Planning. And she will be presenting teaching profession as a refugee, teacher professional development and learning in refugee settings. So I will give you the mic, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Raoul. I'm just sharing my screen. Can everyone see?
We can see it.
Wonderful. So what I'd like to do today is to briefly share some insights from a multi-country research study that we're conducting in partnership with our wonderful colleagues at Education Development Trust that explores the topic of teacher management in refugee settings in policy and practice. And what I would like to talk about today specifically is some insights that we've gained about the importance of teacher professional development and actually the possibilities for teachers to enter the actual teaching profession rather than just do this as something that is a precarious job for them. So we're looking at the kind of intersection between promising policies and promising practices and seeing how we can support that further. So to start with the challenge, I think what we see a lot of today is that there's an emphasis on, when we talk about the right to education, specifically for refugees, we tend to focus on children. And there's a tendency to view teachers in this overall discourse as a supply. And in fact, those of us familiar with the Sustainable Development Goal, we see that they're actually referred to in the goal as a supply, a qualified supply, service providers only. So this is true for refugee teachers as well, who work in these settings. They face financial and social insecurity. They often have limited opportunities for professional development and having that accredited, and they experience threats to their overall well-being. So what we're sort of seeing with our research is kind of the importance of recognizing that refugee teachers are themselves members of affected communities and that they are also rights holders. So they have a right to lifelong learning as well, and they have a right to decent work conditions. So to give an example of a sort of promising, a much happier way of looking at the world, is that in recent years we have seen a kind of promising global policy framework that supports both refugees and host communities, importantly. So there's possibilities to return home for refugees, but also possibilities for integration with host communities and much more of a whole society approach. Specifically, a lot of our work focuses on the East African region, where we see the Intergovernmental Authority for Development focused on peace and prosperity in the region of East Africa. They have come up with these legal instruments that are particularly important for teachers in these settings. The one is the Djibouti Declaration on Refugee Education, which is again focused on the right to education primarily for children, but looks at the importance of including refugee teachers. And there's a lot in there about harmonizing working conditions, but primarily there's also a lot about the importance of facilitating accreditation across borders, implementing fast tracking and training, and also supporting pre and in-service professional development for both refugees and national teachers. And then in 2019, we have the Kampala Declaration that supports the right to work, somehow finding solutions through governments. And so I'm just going to close with an example from our research from a couple of years ago, where we saw an initiative that was funded through the Education Cannot Wait program, which is a global program, and it ran from 2018 to 2020. And what was interesting about this program is it was kind of responding to the strange funding cycles that humanitarian funding tends to have this short-term window. So they looked at how to take the 3-year Ethiopian teaching diploma, first of all, turning it into a 4-year summer program so that refugees who were teaching could gain their qualifications while still in service by doing it in the summers, then realized funding deadlines were too short. So they came up with a flexible program that could be completed in 2 years, which would involve summer programs, it would involve self-directed learning, and also tutors from colleges of teacher education coming in to support. So the example that we have in terms of this quote is that we have a representative from a College of Teacher Education in Ethiopia highlighting the importance of actually working with national institutions to partner together and to think about this as something that supports the education of refugees and host communities, and that recognizes teachers as a professional who are then able to better support their families and their communities, whether they are refugee communities or the host communities. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephanie, very much for this quite succinct and interesting experience you are working on already, and very much considering the right to education, the right to work, that needs to be really an important component. I would like to, in the practices, I would like to move a little forward and would like to ask you some questions. I would say not specifically, but probably I would be interesting to hear your view that, of course, I can see there are many challenges, even if you don't have the chance to mention on. But I would like to ask you, if given on one hand, the well-documented use of smartphones, mobile broadband by some refugees, migrants, populations, while others lacking these resources to afford access to technology or live in areas without adequate infrastructure, how has technology impacted educational, employment, teaching opportunities for migrants, refugees, or internally displaced people? I think this is something that we have been discussing in session 1. I would like to know if you can help us to given your experience in the specific cases, if you can be so kind to give some of your highlights on this question. So mainly how the technology has been able to influence, to impact in reinforcing, but also sometimes as a gap for implementing the program. I don't know if someone would like to jump in. Yes, Ruth.
Yes, maybe I think the most easy way to answer this question is, well, understanding that everybody has a mobile phone. A refugee coming to a new country does have a mobile phone, probably, or is able to get a mobile phone soon after entering the new country. Mobile phone is actually a perfect tool for proving which talents and skills someone possesses, because with a mobile phone you can easily make short videos about a person acting in a specific situation, which can of course be a labor situation. What RVA is helping then, RVA could use these kind of videos to help link someone to the best learning and, more importantly, the best labor option existing in a country. So if a refugee comes to a new country without proper documents on paper, I would say that's the old world. The new world is about moving yourself and your talents and proving your talents by means of using your mobile phone. So this is a very strong tool, and we're neglecting that a bit. And also for further learning, the same mobile phone is very usable for further learning. You know, you can get access to any app helping you to learn a culture, helping you to learn a language, helping you to master a specific skill that is needed to get a real job offer, etc., etc. That's.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Someone else would like to jump into this one?
Yeah. In our
Stephanie?
case, yeah, sorry, Stephanie, go ahead.
Diana, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
Okay. So in our case, in our program, as you mentioned, that the mobile is the easiest way to connect with the teachers, whether to communicate or to send assignments. And our assignments, they were on a group, so they can share the assignment, they can get feedback from their peers. So it's a beautiful, beautiful experience. It's cheap, available, accessible. You don't need to train them on it. It's like everyone has WhatsApp, and it's low bandwidth. This is another advantage. And there's something that we discovered in our program, that in 4 years, we always do end of course teacher survey. And the year that we gave the course online, like totally on Zoom, we had the highest teacher survey results. Everyone felt more comfortable to go on screen and to participate and to speak, because our program focuses on speaking and listening. Plus, we were able to reach many, many teachers who are in rural areas that usually, if we were doing the course face-to-face, we wouldn't be able to reach.
Thank you, Diana, very much. Stephanie?
Yes, I was going to say that, again, we see, specifically from the sort of teacher perspective, certainly mobile phones, we see in a lot of research projects actually how teachers use them, WhatsApp, to kind of communicate with each other, to provide coaching, to give advice to each other. But I think one of the things that we've seen with the pandemic is it's not just about sort of finding the devices. And I think teachers are often put in a double bind, because not only do they have to learn themselves how to use, but they also have to learn how to teach ICT skills if they're going to use them with their learners to support remote learning. So I think, again, the sort of last point that I made about really ensuring that institutes of teacher education are sort of able to provide that support, both in pre-service teacher education as well as in service, to really sort of make those opportunities for blended and flexible learning, so that we don't end up just throwing technology at a problem without, you know, having to actually be able to use that.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I would like to move into another question that I think is quite relevant for understanding a lot how to move from this research perspective that we are trying to develop and was presented in session 1. And I would like just to ask you if you have key recommendations that can be taken away for countries, for UIL, for UNESCO, for other organizations, for further research on this topic particularly, which is very much these opportunities and for refugees, migrants, internally displaced persons, very much related to RVA, very much related to literacy and technology. I don't know if you could help us to find like what needs to be continue discussing, searching, researcher, having dialogues on this, that it's quite a pending issue. I don't know if you have something in mind that could help us. Ruth?
Yeah, well, you know, I think a very crucial element is that I think that we are all aware that we're living in a world that's changing, a learning culture towards a more holistic and personalized learning system. The personalized entails that we should be able to have the learner as a sort of co-maker available in our learning systems. So we need to be able to share ownership of the learning with the learner, because the learner sits on top of a number of talents, potential talents to be enhanced, potential talents to be accredited, and then the learning could only be aimed best at providing the desired learning and skip the unnecessary learning that we all offer in our own countries to people. For refugees and migrants, this is even a stronger cause, because if we are able to enhance their ownership of their talents, the learning and even the lifelong learning comes in even more quicker.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that reflection. Anybody else? Diana, yes, please.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the teachers that we work with regarding our program. You know, the interesting thing that when we start working like few years ago, and even the research a few years ago, when the teachers started teaching in the NGOs, they didn't have a background of teaching. You know, they didn't have any training, nothing. But now, after around 10 years, a lot of these teachers have been through a lot of training, a lot of professional development. They are at a very good level in many NGOs that we are working with, that we need to focus on sustainable solutions, on solutions that, as Ruth mentioned, build capacity, internal capacities, and to give them this chance of having ownership of their professional development and lifelong learning. And this is something very important we need to highlight and to work on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Punramol or Stephanie? Punramol, please.
Yeah, but I would like to share with you about the Thailand context. Education in the learning center cannot be transferred. Even there are cooperation and collaboration between non-formal education in Thailand and the migrants' home countries. Even though the learner obtain certification, they are not yet accredited by the central office, since it is only the local collaboration. And in addition, educational results transferring cannot be done because of the lack of standardized curriculum between Thai and their home countries. So I would like to give you some recommendation that there should be curriculum developed, cross-border curriculum for, okay, I mean, maybe we start with the Asian, in Asian first, right? By the Office of the Basic Education Commission. So this way will help provide education to meet the quality standard in line with Asian economic policies.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, so from our perspective, what we're seeing now as we're doing our research in Uganda, recognition of prior learning is a big challenge, especially for refugees who've been educated in the more French-speaking, the Francophone system, who have come to Uganda. So they might be fully qualified teachers and are not able to, even though they have the right, they could have the right to work in Uganda, they would then not be able to have those recognized. I think what is quite promising to see is that this has been recognized as a major problem. And I know that our colleagues at UNESCO in Uganda are actually doing a study looking at the previous qualifications of refugees who are teaching to see if they can support further validation. So it's heartening to see that people are aware of these issues.
Thank you very much. This is very, very useful to continue thinking, to continue the dialogue, and of course recognizing that there is a lot still to do, still to work, still to think. But in a way, I like very much this dialogue between the research that is taking place, that is the practice that we can taste in a way what is working, what is not working, and of course the reality is changing so fast that sometimes we need to be faster in the process. But thank you very much for your inspiration, for your work, and for sharing your experience. This has been quite nice. Thank you very much. I appreciate that a lot. And then, well, I give the microphone for the last session. It will be a closing session now, just to wrap up and thank you. So I will invite the director of UIL to take the mic.
Thank you, Raul, and thanks to all the panelists. I would just like maybe to, highlight some of the points that have been made by the different speakers during this webinar. First of all, regarding the outcomes of the recent work of UIL, both on RVA and on technology, I think that we saw that this research has identified both some promising practices and tools in both areas, as well as some of the important principles that need to be taken into account. I would just like to stress one or two elements regarding this dimension in particular. The fact that lifelong learning starts with literacy, and then reinforcing and really building a strong literacy and numeracy skills is really the foundation to be further enlarged with other basic skills, including, we heard in the presentations, the growing importance of digital skills. So I think this is something that needs to be highlighted. I believe that the different applications and experiences that we heard from Lebanon, Thailand, as well as at the international level, I think showed that there are certain principles that again need to be actually taken into account. The importance of language also teaching, and I think that we've understood the importance of this dimension in the context of Lebanon. And in relation to that, the importance of teachers and the preparation of teachers to actually address this particular target groups, as we heard both from the presentation based on Ethiopia, from our colleague from IEP, and as well as the presentation on Lebanon. So I think that we have altogether a number of, assets that need to be further built upon to reinforce the interventions targeting refugees, migrants, and internally displaced people. I would like to again recall what our colleague from UNHCR said regarding the importance of connected education, and also regarding the rich experience of UNHCR in actually implementing this in different contexts, and this experience is capitalized in the publication that was released yesterday. So I think that's something that needs to be really stressed. I mean, the importance of connectivity for migrants and refugees. And I would like on this note to signal that yesterday at the Reward Ed Summit in Dubai, UNESCO and Dubai Cares did actually launch the so-called Reward Declaration on connectivity for education, which is a strong call, to encourage governments and other partners to actually facilitate and promote connectivity so that digital resources can be really put at the use for lifelong learning. And I think that this call has a particular resonance when it relates to migrants and refugees. So I think that a lot has to be done in that direction, and we will certainly at the international level and including in cooperation with our sister agency UNHCR continue to work in that direction. Meanwhile, I would like again to recall that the outcomes of UL work that have been presented today are going to be published early next year. So we encourage you to actually read and learn more about those experiences will contribute to actually improve the practices benefiting migrants and refugees through the implementation of RVA, as well as through the use of distance education. When it comes to UL, I mean, this is an area in which we will continue to work in the years to come. So there will be further initiatives in this area, and we will be ready also to work more with member states to support them in actually implementing RVA tools, targeting those populations, but also, of course, using in a more effective and a more extensive way the resources of technology, both online and offline. I think again that we have now accumulated a number of experiences also in the context of COVID-19, where distance and digital tools were used to a large extent. So I think that we have a number of innovative approaches that can be further improved and reinforced to guide us in improving the programs targeting migrants and refugees. So again, I would like to thank all the panelists, our colleagues from UNHCR, our colleagues from Thailand, from Lebanon, as well as our other panelists. I thank all the participants that have been actually following and contributing to the discussion in the chat. And I would like to invite all of us, in fact, to celebrate International Migrants Day tomorrow. So thanks to all. And we're looking forward to further engagement on what continues to be, what will continue to be a very important, work, and a very important dimension to actually make lifelong learning a reality for all. Thanks to all. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.